I guess this whole conversation kind of is the kid in the back going, are we there yet? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Truth Talks, the podcast that brings you real strategies for sustainable fitness transformation. And today we're going to talk about progress, because progress is the thing we're kind of all chasing with our fitness journeys. Fitness is inherently about self-improvement, development, chasing goals, right? So today we really want to talk about how can you actually evaluate progress on your fitness journey? How do we know if we're making progress? How do we know if we're making the quote unquote right kind of progress? We're going to talk a little bit about different challenges people have with measuring progress, and then talk about all the different types of variables and factors that you can look at to help you measure your own progress. What do you think about that, Paris?
I think it's good. I love progress.
You love progress? Who doesn't?
Yeah.
Can we just start off by actually quickly defining progress? What is progress in the context of fitness journey?
I like my analogy. So we'll relate it to, let's say you put something into Google Maps, and progress is the distance from where you started towards where you're actually trying to arrive at. So let's say, you've completed 1 mile of the journey, right? Tells you how many minutes you have left. So you're okay. You're like, a few minutes into the journey. That's kind of progress towards your destination. And it's the same thing with our fitness goals. It's like anything that is, both qualitative and quantitative, which we're going to chat about. But it signifies just moving in the right direction towards your goals and have made at least one, step forward towards that destination that you're trying to get to.
Right. And I think it's really important to say progress isn't the destination, right? Because there's an intended outcome there. But if we were to just look at progress as like, I did the thing, I'm there, I've arrived, we're missing that full journey that got us there, right? And I think if we constantly just wait until we get to the destination, we're not actually identifying how far away is it? How much longer do we have? Like, you don't have the kid in the back going, are we there yet? And so actually, I guess this whole conversation kind of is the kid in the back going, are we there yet? And helping us be able to give that kid an answer of like, we're getting there, or have another snack. And, we're going to keep driving for a while.
Yeah, I agree. I love that.
When it comes to measuring progress, why do you think it's so challenging for people? You've got tons of experience, coaching people, and you've seen their reactions to making progress or not feeling like they're making progress. Why does it kind of sometimes feel like a struggle?
I think first thing comes down to impatience, right? Everybody wants things yesterday, and those of us chasing fitness goals, a lot of times it's like that with our fitness journey too. So a lot of times time is just a variable that they don't have. And even if they're doing the right things, they just need to wait and keep doing those things until the sufficient period of time has passed to reveal the progress. The second thing is that apart from, obviously we track a number of things that would indicate measuring progress on our side, but a lot of people just don't have like a formal way of doing it, or don't have an accountability partner or a coach or something like that. Like they just don't accurately track their progress. And we'll talk about how exactly to do that. But you'd be surprised, people just kind of go and quote unquote work hard, but have no actual way of knowing if they're moving in the right direction, which is wild, but it's not uncommon.
To go back to your analogy around Google Maps, right? It's like you put in your destination and you're not sure, like if you're evaluating the distance in kilometers, light years, miles, I don't know, yardsticks, whatever it is. It's like not knowing what your metric is. And then you have no way of answering the kids in the back and saying how much longer you've got, because you don't have a barometer. You don't have a measurement method. And so that's hopefully what we're going to clear up today is what are those different measurement methods you can look at? What are those metrics that are going to be your indicators?
Yeah, or I'll even continue that analogy. Sorry.
Go for it. It's gonna work.
Or you press the destination, right? You know what it is, and then you turn off Google Maps and drive. You're like, I'm driving, I should be getting there, but it's like you don't know where to turn left or right. You don't know where to keep going straight. You have no idea how much time you have left in the journey. You don't know how much distance. Like you just turned off Google Maps. So that's why we need to track progress along the way. But anyways.
I'm going to say the thing that you always say, because I think it's still relevant in this conversation. What gets measured gets managed, right? So the other thing that's important to know is if you are measuring your progress somehow, you can manage your journey. If you know, this analogy is just going to keep going. I think it's just the theme of this episode now. If you know how much longer you have to go, you can then know when do you have to stop for gas. You know when to call the person whose house you're arriving at and be like, I've got this much time left. Like, you can plan. So in order for us to manage that journey and that road trip, you got to monitor it. You got to measure it. That's why we're here today, to talk all about how you can do that and evaluate your own progress.
Perfect.
I think most people listening, maybe not all, but most, probably think of fitness progress as the scale, the body weight scale. And part of that is probably just related to the fact that a lot of social media progress updates are this many pounds down. I've lost this amount of weight in this much time. Let's start there, because it tends to be the thing that, rightfully or wrongfully, people get anchored with. It's the scale. So can we talk a little bit about scale weight as a measure of progress, where it matters, how it's helpful, and then also where it's not and where it's insufficient?
So I think scale weight is definitely something good to track as long as you have the right mindset about it, because it shows you directionality in terms of your energy balance. And a lot of times, go back episodes and watch if you haven't already to learn more about that. But I think it tells you medium to long-term changes in regards to that, whether we're eating in a surplus or a deficit. It will give us that directionality. However, the caveat is that in short time frames, it gives us very skewed data. So, and if we're going to use scale weight correctly, A, we need to look at a longer time frame of trends. B, we need to take enough, data points to actually have a representing trend line, I'll call it. Because if we only weigh ourselves once every 2 weeks, and then it's not going to be good. We need to weigh ourselves probably 4+ times a week. Then we make trends. So we need to look at a long enough time frame, like moving averages of those weeks, hopefully, and then also realizing like short-term fluctuations are going to happen, and not to get hung up on them, because we're not looking at that. We're looking at trends. So I think if you're only looking at, if you're doing it wrong if you're only weighing yourself like once every week or once every 2-3 weeks. And doing it in a different context, which we can talk about as well, and then also relying on that single data point to drive decisions. And my coach actually said something great. He said, no single weigh-in should drive a decision in terms of like how you plan your fitness and nutrition. Yeah.
Right. And what your next steps are. Yeah. So I like what you talked about, the trend line, because, and you alluded to this, but I want to just call it out super directly, is the scale weight will and should fluctuate from day to day. So we need to plan around that and expect the fluctuations to happen. And that is not getting caught up on that single weigh-in and that single number, like you just said. But it's also having other sources to look at so that you can contextualize it, right? It's like if you're building a puzzle and you have one piece, that's a lot harder. But let's say you already have 3 pieces laid down, and now all of a sudden you can say, does this piece fit here or not? You're dependent on having other information to help you guide that decision. And that's what we're here to talk about today, is how do we understand scale weight through the lens of other pieces of information too. And then I think you're no longer dependent on a single data point. Now all of a sudden we're saying, okay, what's our trend line with the scale weight? But what else are we seeing that might indicate how to interpret that scale weight? You think that's a fair summary?
Yeah, I like that puzzle analogy, one piece of the puzzle. Or if you only look at scale weight, it's kind of like if your lens was like partially blocked. If you were looking through a lens and you're like, okay, am I making progress? But like, there was dots and coverings on certain part of the lenses, and you weren't even able to see the full picture. So it's part of the story, it's part of the puzzle, but it's not the full thing. So people need to oftentimes like understand the other ways of measuring progress.
Yeah, I love that. So let's talk about those other ways of measuring progress. There's both qualitative and quantitative ways. Scale weight is definitely on the quantitative side. So why don't we continue with that trend and talk about other more quantitative ways that we can measure and evaluate progress. And before we dive in, I just want to say and caveat that what we're talking about today is very specific to your fitness journey through the lens of physique, body composition. So that's kind of where we're anchoring the conversation today, so far at least. So that's the context we're talking about.
Yeah. I think the first thing is actually training performance, because training performance kind of drives the physique changes that we're after anyways. So, performance is a key metric to look at, because it's kind of like, I guess, would that be considered a leading indicator of future physique progress?
I think it depends. I think it probably depends on the person and their training experience, right? But I guess what you're getting at is like your training performance is indicative of how your body is changing in some ways, because if you're performing in certain ways, then you might be putting on muscle, right? But I'd love to hear from you why you brought that up in the context of quantitative data, because a lot of people might go, well, isn't that a subjective feeling? My training felt good. My performance feels good. So why or how do you see training performance as a quantitative variable?
I'm talking about the actual like numbers. So like, keeping form and execution the same and everything else the same, like how many reps and how much weight are we lifting on our sets, and tracking like actual gym performance over time. And again, there's so many nuances with how that relates to physique changes, as we might have just oversimplified right now. But it does give at least part of the puzzle, especially when it comes to driving muscle growth. Like if we're not, again, contact's the same in terms of form, execution, whatever. If we're not achieving progression in terms of, the weights and reps that we're lifting over time, we're probably not driving muscle growth.
Because muscle growth is going to be the adaptation to that consistent progression in the gym.
Mm-hmm.
You could say a similar story for fat loss goals and things as well, though, because I know you've talked about this in the past, is sometimes if your training performance actually stays the same, however, you have lost body weight, your relative strength could have increased as well. So, looking at the measures of your numbers in the gym through the lens of how is my body changing can also really help you understand how you're adapting to the training stimulus.
Right. Just another piece of the puzzle, just like the weigh-ins are, training performance, another one. But more nuances with that one.
Definitely. And that could be a whole episode on itself, so we'll save that.
Yeah.
But I think just if we were to say the takeaway here on that is, if you're looking for an additional quantitative variable to help you gauge your progress with your physique, look at your training performance. Training performance in terms of numbers: sets, reps, weight, volume. Did I oversimplify that enough?
I think it's okay. We can simplify it. We don't need
Okay,
It's
perfect.
good. Yeah.
So then what else on the quantitative side of things?
So you can also do circumference measurements. Sometimes I'll get clients to take these if there's more drastic changes. Like let's say somebody starts at a much higher body fat percentage and then they get significantly leaner. Body measurements are something that's relevant. However, I do think human error is a big thing with body measurements, which is why I don't really get a lot of people to take them. Also, I can nowadays just see visuals in terms of how we're changing. And yeah, if you're off with your measurements because there's human error and we're only taking them like monthly, for example, it's like, okay, well, it's a really good data, not really, and it's just another thing for people to do. But technically, body circumference measurements can be a good measure of progress. Under the qualitative, which we'll talk about later, your clothes will tell you the circumference measurements as well.
So circumference measurements are things like if you were to take one of those tape measures and wrap it around your waist or your hips or your bicep, right? And so that's a direct indicator of like, oh, when you see somebody said, I lost this many inches, right? You're assigning a number to that. But to your point, there's human error involved. But for some people, that can be quite informative, especially if they're able. And motivating. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely motivating. Is there anything else on the quantitative side that you want to add in?
I don't think so. Unless you have a habit-based goal, which is, or again, kind of off left field here, but if you have a habit-based goal, you could set like, for example, it's like I hit my protein intake this many days of the week. So for habit-based of goals, which in turn we help lead to physique changes because that's the context we're talking about. But habit-based goals you can quantify in certain aspects from an adherence perspective. But in terms of actual progress, unless you're defining progress by better adherence, then no.
So let's move into qualitative. There's lots of qualitative, and you actually alluded to some of them along the lines of the previous discussion. What's the number one qualitative thing that you look for to help monitor or evaluate someone's progress?
I think just perception of I look better.
Right.
I can see the changes in my body. Yeah.
And I think there's two sides to that perception. There's the actual visual changes. So you as a coach or someone else looking at that person and seeing the visual differences. That's one, right? And that can come from a variety of different sources. That can come from you as a coach, pulling up the side-by-side comparisons and showing somebody, look at these visual difference. That could also come from friends, family members, coworkers who say, wow, you're looking different, right? And that does become a qualitative indicator of progress. Arguably, I'd say probably the most important one, because most of the time, that's what people are chasing, right? And not to say we're only concerned with how we look. That's not the end of things. But in that situation, your appearance and your visuals are kind of representative of your effort. In the context we're working in, where we're working with people who are intentionally trying to make those visual changes. And a lot of times people will say, okay, I have a goal weight. I have a goal weight. And one of the questions I'll ask them is, if you don't hit that weight, but you see a picture of yourself and you look exactly how you dream you want to look, is that a win? And they'll usually say yes. And that's another reason why I encourage people not to just look at the scale, because the way you look and the visual identity you have for yourself is often different than the number on the scale that you think you want to hit.
I made a reel once that goes in with that. I said, you don't wear your scale weight on your forehead, you walk around with your body. So we have these fixations on these numbers, but let's say you put on 5 pounds of muscle in a year, and then you're at like a similar leanness, let's say. You're going to be at a completely different look and a completely different body composition, but the scale weight could be the exact same, especially, I don't know why, but with women, you can be like the exact same body weight, but have a significant visual difference. So it's like, well, should we still only define progress by the scale? Probably not. Because as I said, we don't walk around. It's not like I'm walking around with, okay, 170 something on my forehead. And people are like, oh, you're into fitness or you're in shape. They're like, oh, Prayers looks like he works out,
Right. Exactly. And I talked about the second side of that perception of visuals, right? And I think that's the one that exists in your own head. When you're evaluating your progress and you say, oh, I feel like I look different. And that sounds kind of counterintuitive, feel like I look. But that perception that you have of your own visuals, and sometimes that can be, I know I've had moments where, like, if I'm in a fat loss phase and all of a sudden, I'm like, oh, my waist just feels tighter. And that matters for a lot of people. It should matter, right? It's your perception of your progress. And so if you feel like your visuals are changing, I think that's very important.
But mind you, a lot of people have a tough time seeing their own visual progress because you see yourself every single day. I have a presentation I did in our client group, which is it's like a flip book analogy. If you those stop motion books where you flip through, if you look at one single page and then the next day you look at the next page, it could be like looks the same as yesterday. But only once you do like the scroll through, you see all the different changes, and by the end, it's a completely different character than one is at the beginning. So because we're desensitized to our changes, we have to take progress pics, which is one of the next ones, right?
Yeah, exactly. Progress pics are so essential. And I think progress pics are that snapshot of visual changes. And everybody hates taking them. Like, I don't think I've met, maybe you have. I haven't met someone who goes, oh my God, I love taking my progress pics.
Never.
Right? But they're a necessary evil. And evil is even a harsh way to put it. But they are necessary because they can be, right? Even if you take those progress pics every day, to use your flipbook analogy, what we're looking to see is that first page versus that last page, or even the midpoint. You can still see changes, right? So progress pictures are actually essential. And to make things practical for people, how often would you recommend somebody take progress pics so they don't get demoralized if they're taking them every day and you're like, oh, I don't see any changes? But also we're able to capture those snapshots along the way that can be really reaffirming.
Yeah, good question. So I think in a more fat loss based phase, probably biweekly is a good option. For people that are getting to like extremely low body fat percentages, even weekly is good. And before a show, I get clients to check in every day when we're peaking them. But in general context, fat loss biweekly, muscle growth roughly once a month is a pretty good kind of way to go. If you're in more of a recomposition phase, I still think probably once a month is a good idea.
Yeah, those types of changes take a little bit longer to make, right?
Yeah.
And I think also in a fat loss phase, people naturally get a little bit more hung up on the scale because you think, oh, this is the thing I'm trying to move, right? So taking those visual progress pictures at a more frequent interval continues to reaffirm that detachment from the scale.
Yeah. And things just happen much quicker with fat loss, like on a time course perspective, even though sometimes it's more challenging. Fat loss is like going down a slide and muscle growth is like climbing the ladder in terms of time ratios.
Yes, that's such a great analogy. I love that. Other indicators of qualitative changes. So you actually talked about this one. I just want to bring it back up as we're kind of hammering it home. Is your clothes fitting better?
Yeah.
Because that is the inches and the circumference. That is the visual changes manifesting differently. And fitting better can also be different definitions for different people, right? Like in a muscle gaining phase, you might be like, oh, my t-shirts are actually tight around my shoulders. That's a win. Versus in a fat loss phase, it might be like, oh my God, my pants are pretty loose. Or I had to, do up my belt buckle one tighter, things like that. What kind of role or what kind of feedback do you often get from clients when it comes to their clothes, and how important is that to them?
Yeah, good question. A lot of times they almost feel that before they can visually see themselves that, oh, I look different. Because it talks about we get desensitized. But I think people start to usually feel that, and then somebody will say something and they're like, oh, I am making progress. And then they see the visual, they can acknowledge the visual difference. But I think most of the times it comes down to the pants. Like people will be like, okay, you know what? I went down a belt loop, or my pants don't fit anymore. I had to go get new pants. Like that's usually the telltale sign. Even I can tell what body weight I'm at just by how tight my waistband is on certain pants. Like I wouldn't even need to, I can just kind of guess what body what body weight I'm at just by how it feels subjectively.
Yeah. And I like that you said that that's often the first thing people experience, because I think if somebody is, just getting started on their journey or trying to understand, like, how can I start evaluating progress, look out for that, because it probably will come first. And because you look at yourself every day, as we've said, that won't become immediately noticeable to you. But chances are, okay, maybe you do, but most people don't wear the same pair of pants every single day, right?
I might. No.
You might.
No,
And
no decision fatigue. Yeah.
we all have our favorite pair. But usually there's a certain time period in between when you put on a pair of pants. So it does give you that indicator, like at these somewhat frequent, but not everyday intervals, which is kind of cool. I made the mistake of buying my favorite pair of jeans after like a really serious fat loss phase when we did our photo shoot. And now every time I put them on, they're tight. And that's just the way they're always going to be, because that level of leanness wasn't sustainable. But it's a reminder that at one point of time, they fit perfectly.
I have the same thing with those white pants we bought when we were with Tara and Mom downtown Oakville.
Yeah.
But they're stretchy, so they still fit. Like, but I bought them a little loose because I was like, okay, future pairs, there's no way your waist is going to be a 26. No, I'm joking, not 26, but 28.
Yeah. Yeah, because that was like shortly after your competition prep that we bought those.
That was right before. It was like
right before.
a week and a half or something like that. So buy stretchy pants if you're getting super lean.
Yep. Tip of the day, buy stretchy pants.
If you've seen Nacho Libre, you're going to laugh when you hear this. If you haven't, then
go watch
what I just said. Yeah, or again,
go watch it. One of the best, worst movies of all time. Okay, so I want to talk about qualitative measures of progress that aren't necessarily actually tied to physique.
Mm-hmm.
Because we are on a fitness journey, but fitness is very much multiple dimensions coming together. And we work with people to help them, get in good physical shape. But a lot of that is also managing different lifestyle variables, managing how they feel every day, managing their relationships with other people. There's all these different dimensions, and they all relate back to our health and well-being in some way, shape, or form. So I want to talk about all of those indicators of progress that don't actually have anything to do with our physique. Where do you want to start? Which one comes to mind first for you?
I think for this, we can just rhyme them off. And then if I miss some, you catch up. And if I think of more, we can go, because it's just so many. But I think some main ones are like, my day feels easier, like from an energy mood perspective, or even just like walking up and down stairs. Like my day feels easier. I feel more confident, in social settings. I feel more confident, like just in general in life, like, making decisions for my life, because I feel more in control. I feel happier. That's one that oftentimes comes from a mixture of things. I feel more energetic. I have a lot more, but chime in on a few.
I think when you said my day feels easier, there's actually so many different variables within that one, because energy levels, I wake up more alert, right? Sleep quality on that note, right? Your sleep quality, you go to bed, you have more restful sleep. Your day feels easier can be mood oriented, which you talked about. It can be confidence oriented. I think body image is a huge one too. Like we talk about confidence, but confidence and body image, they're related, but they're not the same.
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
being more confident about how you show up in different situations or go about your day is one thing, but how you see yourself when you pass by the mirror is a huge indicator of progress. How do you feel in your own skin? And like, how do you talk to yourself? And if those things are improving or becoming more positive, that is a huge, huge indicator of progress. And arguably the one that is going to have the biggest long-term impact on you as a human.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's even some like off to the side types of progress that people don't think about, kind of like unique ones that I talked about with the habit tracking as progress, but also things like, hey, it was a party and I stayed on track better than I did before.
Mm.
Or I went on vacation and I used to be up 15 pounds and now I was able to stay weight neutral. Not that, again, we're not looking at scale, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
I used
Yeah.
to come back 15 pounds heavier, none of my pants fit, and my face felt super bloated, but now I came back relatively stable in terms of my body comp or whatever, right? How you handle certain situations and is a sign of skill development. And we
Mm-hmm.
talk about this a lot with our clients is like, a lot of these things are just learning and developing new skills, and that's a telltale sign. If you're able to handle certain situations better than you previously have had them handled, then it means you're acquiring skills.
If all of this is about self-improvement to begin with, what is a better indicator of self-improvement than skills development? Like being able to learn and apply a growth mindset, and skills really enable that control over your own lifestyle and decision making. That is like an ultimate indicator of self-improvement. And I think what I love about the language that you used to describe that is, oh, I used to do this, I used to do that. So it's almost like this idea of like you're shedding your skin and you're evolving as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And that by definition is progress. That is 100% progress. So I love this idea of like skills development as progress. Yeah, I can't say enough
Yeah,
about it. So I'll have to just tell
yeah.
myself to shut up.
No, I think even though I'm your brother, I would never tell you to shut up. That's not very nice. Or maybe I should. I think here's something interesting that I think if you're gonna take one takeaway from this, think about this one is people ask, oh, what meal plan do I need to have, or what should my macros be, or what workout plan should I follow, which exercise is better, when they should be asking, what are the skills, behaviors, and actions that I need to develop over time in order to evolve into that next identity of myself and to evolve into that person that I want to be. They're asking almost like the wrong question, because and skills are so important. It's like, as I said, instead of asking those things are great. You need a good plan, but it's like, what are the skills and behaviors I need to develop?
Right. And that's a way that you can then hold yourself accountable to evaluating, are you making progress on those skills? And I think that's where having an objective eye becomes really, really helpful. Having an accountability partner, a coach, some way of actually monitoring that is critical, because it's hard to say, oh, yeah, I think I've got this skill. Do you? How do you know? Right. So having somebody who can find ways to help you monitor the skill development, whether that's like you said, is it checking off, okay, how many days a week did I hit this daily target or this daily objective, this habit? Is this, hey, let's look at a breakdown of how we handled this situation. What are the indicators that we're applying certain skills? And I think stepping outside yourself and seeking that objective opinion becomes really, really valuable in that sense, because when you're doing it on your own and you're just saying, did I follow this training program? Did I hit a macro target? You can kind of do that on your own, but it isn't actually unlocking that self-development. In terms of some of those other non-physique indicators of progress, I think everything that we also talked about does somehow come down to mental health, right? Confidence, energy, mood, self-perception, body image, skills development, which unlocks that sense of control over your own life. All of that
Mm-hmm.
also impacts mental health. So I think when you're looking to evaluate your own progress on your fitness journey, check in with your mental state is what I would say, right? Like check in with your mental state and what is that telling you about the progress that you're making?
I like it. I like it.
We've touched on so many different indicators of progress. If you've tuned in this far, I'd love to hear in the comments from you about like which one of these resonates. Which ones are you currently looking at to evaluate your own progress? Which ones are you now inspired to start looking at to evaluate your own progress? What does progress look like for you? Tell us about it in the comments. We'd love to hear it. We'd love to hear always what is most valuable to you coming out of these episodes. Now, to close things off, I do want to talk a little bit about why monitoring all these factors is important and how, focusing on just making continuous progress can be really beneficial for the long term, right? We are about sustainability. And so I do want to talk a little bit about why these methods of progress unlock sustainable objectives or sustainable lifestyle, right? I think part of it is because there's never an end point. None of these things say like, oh yeah, I got that specific visual attribute. I've done it. I'm done. My fitness journey is over. Right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't get to that point. And actually, that's what I love most about all of this is because it's so continuous. And I think instead of seeing, our progress indicators as checkpoints to an objective, they can be reaffirming that we're on the right track. They're reaffirming that our journey is moving forward, that we are finding self-development. And so that continuous element of things, I think, is what holds me accountable to my own fitness journey. The best part about it is it becomes one big feedback loop. When we start to see these different measures of progress and see them continuously evolving, we want to keep going. Like it's the biggest motivator to keep going. And you don't have to have an end point in mind to be able to evaluate your progress. So that's kind of my number one thing that I want people to really think about is how is your progress setting you up for sustainable, long-term, continuous progression rather than a specific endpoint? And two, how can you use that to your advantage to just keep going?
I like it.
Any builds on that?
Nope.
Wow, we said it all. Amazing. Okay, so this marks the end of this week's episode, which is all about how you can evaluate progress on your fitness journey. We hope you found it helpful. Like I said, drop those comments below. While you're there, feel free to please subscribe. It helps us out. And when you subscribe, you'll be able to get weekly episodes right in your feed. They drop every Monday. If there is a particular topic you want to hear us talk about, a question you want answered, a myth you want busted, let us know and we'd be happy to do a future episode on it. For now, we'll leave you for this week and wishing you all the best. Keep making progress.